here's David Williams, sitting here at a very important topographical point in Seattle, which maybe we'll have time to explain. He will later. But here he is. This is his book, recently out. What does it say? It says, Too High and Too Steep. So he's done a wonderful job of elaborating the topographical changes in Seattle. And people love this book. And so now we've asked him to actually summarize it, one of his hour-long lectures, into 7 minutes. David, it's yours. Go ahead.
Basically, what I do is tell the history of Seattle through the lens of its topography. How have we shaped the land, and how has the land shaped us over time? So I look at 3 big projects: the filling in of the Duwamish Tide Flats, the landscape between Beacon Hill and West Seattle, that historically for half the day would have been underwater at high tide, and at low tide water flowed out and left an expanse of mud. And so this chapter explores the hows and whys of filling in that landscape, creating about 2,200 acres of new land. It starts with a guy named Dutch Ned dumping sawdust from Henry Esler's sawmill and continues all the way up until about the 19-teens with the filling in with sediment of the land.
I'm going to interrupt and say the next thing Gene and I are doing after we leave you is we're going up and look at Dutch Ned's
gravesite.
Right.
Right.
That's what we're doing after we leave you.
Oh, funny.
Because we did a story on him, but I'm sorry for interrupting.
No,
Number
it's okay.
2, go
Number
ahead.
2. So the other big thing I look at is the building of the Lake Washington Ship Canal and the building of the locks, an idea that started in 1854 when Thomas Mercer said that you should connect Lake Washington and Puget Sound via the lake that he's sitting on that he names Lake Union. And so this chapter explores the building of the locks, what were the drivers, but it also looks at the environmental and ecological changes in the landscape over time, what resulted from the building of the Ship Canal and the complete replumbing of Lake Washington. And then the third chapter, and the one that directly relates to where we are right now, is the regrade of the Denny Hill, the 5 regrades from 1897 to 1930. And so the goal of that chapter was to tell the story, talk about R.H. Thompson, the great city engineer, Reginald Heber Thompson, but also to tell the story of the hill. Where does the name come from? Who lived in this landscape? Why did they do it? What were the drivers? What were the results of removing this hill that was 100 feet above us? So where we are right now was the historic high point, 4th and Blanchard, and this was the greatest removal of dirt, about 100 feet. And this hill removed about 11 million cubic yards of dirt. Just to compare, Bertha, if she ever goes through, will remove about 850,000 cubic yards of dirt. So each of these projects was far beyond anything that we can imagine, and certainly far beyond anything that's taken place in the Seattle landscape at this time.
Well, that's a good summary. And as you mentioned, we're here at 4th and Blanchard, where the highest of the 2 Denny Hill summits was, right above us. And you told us just before we turned the camera on that you had actually called up the owner of this building and suggested maybe he'd like to mark that point on the side of this building up, about 10 floors?
About 10 floors, yeah, more or less.
What was his response?
And when I suggested this idea, his response was, "It doesn't resonate with me," and which I've never understood. It seemed like such a simple and elegant way to explore Seattle history.
But it was even a more elegant way of putting you off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't have anything to say at that point. The conversation ended.
What was the word again?
Resonate.
Resonate. Yes, that's sort of he must spend some time in France or something. He's got, he's sort of a sophisticated put down.
Or Big Sur,
Or Big Sur.
Right, yeah, exactly.
But when we went to Europe together, when I was getting my
Yes,
passport.
you wanted to do resonating cathedrals.
No. That's another story. We don't have time for it. But when I was getting my passport at the federal building, who was in line next to me? This guy, Mr. What's his name?
Martin Seeley.
Martin Seeley, I recognized him. He had to get a passport too. So Vox, we had the same power at that instant. Both of us had the same privileges and same responsibilities. We both had to stand in line for a passport.
That's what we call egalite fraternité.
Yeah, thank you.
See.
I have a question here. Do we have another question to ask?
You had a question about
Yeah.
4th and Blanchard.
Well, we just did that.
Right, but part of the house, or how I came up with that.
Yeah, why did you come up with that picture, the one we're using? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. One of my goals in the book was to put people in the landscape. And so I thought what I would do was choose one intersection on Denny Hill and do research to figure out who lived there, what were their stories. And there were two brothers who had houses here, Anson and the two Burwell brothers. And in my research, I found that one of their descendants, a man named John Goff, was living in California, and I tracked him down, and he was kind enough to send me a series of photos of the house, the interior, and such. And so I went with this one because it was really the only good photo I had of a house on Denny Hill, but I think it really exemplifies the type of houses that were on the hill. It was this very nice neighborhood, beautiful houses.
Well, there was a lot of nice houses, yeah. We've done a few stories over the last 30 years on houses, and I agree with you. They are hard to find, but there are a few.
There are a few.
Yeah.
As far as I know, only one still exists. From Denny Hill.
Oh, yeah, you mean I know. Why don't you quiz me? Ask me,
So
Paul, where is that?
Paul, where's the one house
I
that still
think you're
exists?
talking about the southeast corner of Bell and 2nd Avenue.
The Belltown Funky Studios?
Well, whatever it is. It's a Gothic structure that above a tavern, And
Next to the Mexican food place.
Yeah,
yes,
right.
exactly.
Am I right?
Yes. As far as I've been able to track down, that's the only building I found that still
right.
exists.
Didn't you have a eureka moment, Paul,
Yeah,
when you found
see,
that?
that's really important in my history of studying these subjects. That was really what got me going, because I saw a picture of that thing, and I was always interested in where are all the pictures of Denny Hill. I couldn't
Right.
find any. I mean, the original neighborhood.
Right.
I saw that, and I just sort of thought, that looks like it might have. This is before the regrade.
Right.
That might have, and so I did a story about it. It's in the first now
Yeah.
and then book.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there were probably a good number of houses were actually moved off of Denny Hill. One of the ones in this intersection of 4th and Blanchard, the owner sold the house just before the regrade of 1908 to 1910. The house was then moved north, and during the final regrade, the 5th regrade, the house had to be moved again off a spot, but it was moved off and then moved back exactly where it was.
Okay.
It became an apartment complex.
When I was a kid, we'd go on vacations, and my dad would always ask us geography questions. And that was fun. We looked
Right.
forward to trip, not
Yeah.
so much to see nature, but to get Dad's questions
Right.
so we could perform for him.
Right.
Did your folks do anything like that? How does it that you have we have coincident interests?
I think I got it through my mom. As you know, she's interested in history, and that
Written
love,
several books.
Written several books, and that love of history just sort of came down to me. And yeah, to me, it's a way to connect to the place and develop a deeper relationship to the place I live. And
What was your eureka moment in deciding upon what topic to take on?
I was actually meeting for this book. I wanted to do a book about what were the stories just under the surface of Seattle, and I was meeting with an archaeologist who works on the Alaskan Way Viaduct, and he said there really aren't any great. It's not like we have a Pompeii underneath us, but what's really interesting is the landscape and the change that we've done to the landscape. And when he said that, I was like, oh, it clicked into place. Like, yeah, you're right. That's the story, is how we do have a Pompeii of history underneath us of landscape change, and as dramatic as any place in the country.
Now, I was hoping that in this book you would sort out all the claims about underground Seattle and the different elevation changes in Pioneer Square. Did you do that?
I looked into it and tried to piece together some of it. I didn't.
You fled from it in fear, didn't you?
It's complicated, as they say in modern terminology.
I think in our
Now, don't get
first
too personal with
video,
this.
I think Paul said exactly the same.
What?
You used exactly the same as you said. Complicated
Yeah, right. Yeah.
history of underground.
Well, I
Seattle.
think
I mean, there's a.
Greg Lang perhaps would be the person to do that more detailed demystifying of that, but he's not done it yet.
You can find the map. I mean, I put together a map that shows how much the land was changed in elevation through that area, but part of it is I know where it ended up. I don't necessarily know exactly what all the original elevations were.
Yeah.
And I think, the same thing with the Denny. There's so much we don't know about Denny Hill,
Yeah.
as you well know.
What is the greatest loss in your mind? Many of us mourn the Seattle Hotel in Pioneer Square.
He's leading you to the Denny Hotel, I think.
Maybe
Yeah.
I could be.
I think Denny Hill, the hotel would have been amazing to have been able to come to Seattle. Actually, I'll say the little trolley up to the Denny Hotel. I would have loved to have ridden the little 1 block long trolley
Yeah,
that
they could
Moore
have put it
built.
on a scaffold, right?
Yeah, it's, it was probably better than any of the modern trolleys that we have going in Seattle. At least it went from point A to point B and you could use it, unlike the new ones. But that's a whole nother issue we don't need to get into.
No.
What's next
For me?
for you?
I'm actually just finishing up a book of walks around Seattle that weave together human and natural history. So there's, for instance, I have a walk that explores Denny Hill, what was here. So it takes stuff from Too High and Too Steep, a previous book, Street Smart Naturalist, and other just walks I've done around Seattle. And
Didn't you do walk books before? Haven't you?
I did a field guide before, and I've led walks for years, but this idea is really to, again,
Look how fit he is, Gene. This guy can walk. Yeah, he's really fit.
but again, it really does boil down to, two things in what I'm interested in is one, and I think you all have the same thing, is having people reconsider places they've walked by every day and never really thought about the story of that place. But also, again, this idea of connecting people to the place they live. What are the stories of landscape and how do they, and that they still affect us. That we're still affected by the fill that we did in the tide flats. We are still being influenced by the fact, how different this city would be if Denny Hill were right here now. I sort of joke that we're sort of rebuilding Denny Hill with all these buildings. We should just throw a big carpet over it and we'd have Denny Hill again.
Yeah, somebody else suggested that before you. It was the columnist in the Times, very good humorist, can't think of his name. But anyway, here it is. How much does it cost?
$30.
$30, not a bad deal.
My mom
really.
says it's worth at least twice that.
Diana loves it. Diana, who's my editor, loves this book. What else? Anything? Any last word? Not that we haven't already run way beyond.
No, I can't think of anything.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
Thanks for showing up.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
David Wade.
Yeah.